Stout versus porter. What is the real difference? Hello and welcome back to the channel, and yes, today I'm taking a look at all things dark beer to try and answer the question, what is the real difference between a stout and a porter? Now, when doing the research for this video, I did the obvious thing. I kind of knew in my head what the difference was, or what I thought it was, but I thought I'd better fact check myself against the internet as a whole to give you a proper answer. And spoiler alert, well, I couldn't. As with most things in this world, especially when it comes to beer, there are always exceptions, and with stouts and porters it feels like there are more exceptions sometimes than the rules they even started out with. In general, it is considered that a stout is darker than a porter, it's got a stronger ABV than a porter, and it has a more rich, roasty, and maybe not quite as sweet note as a porter. But we all know of plenty of stouts that are loads sweeter than porters, and we know of some porters that are definitely darker than some stouts, and it all does get a bit confusing. There are ingredient generalities which make stouts darker than porters. They use a lot more roasted barley rather than malted barley that you get in a porter, but again, this is just generic stuff. It's not necessarily a rule, and there are loads of examples out there of stuff not really being what it says it is. I can think of Thornbridge. They put their Cocoa Wonderland, a chocolate porter, into the supermarket. Okay, colour and texture wise it is pretty porterish, but it comes in I think at 6.8%, which is, well, stronger than most stouts you'll find. We're not talking about Imperial and Baltic and all the rest of it, the high ABV stuff. We're just talking about general terms. And yeah, on the flip side, Guinness, the most well-known stout in the world, traditionally called itself a porter. So I think you'll agree there's definitely a lot of room for confusion. As a result, I thought the best thing to do is bring a stout and a porter from the same brewery, a brewery that is pretty world renowned for being on the mark these days. I'm a little bit annoyed it's an American brewery, if I'm honest, but I couldn't really find a UK offering that I thought was going to be representative. So this is a stout and porter from Sierra Nevada. I'm going to pitch them head to head to try and work out what the actual differences are, at least today in 2024 anyway. So what are the differences just on the cans? Well, other than the colour of the can, the stout has got the darker one. They look pretty similar. They've both just called these Sierra Nevada Stout and Sierra Nevada Porter. I have reviewed these years ago, and I was actually told at that point they were discontinued, but it looks like they're back in production again, and I'm very happy about that because I enjoyed both of them, but previously I didn't review them back to back. The stout in this case is 5.8% and the porter is 5.6, so not exactly a massive gulf in difference there. Is there any info on the back? Let's read the descriptions. The stout says, it all started with Stout, the first beer we ever made on our original hand-built brew house. It's packed with deep roasted malt flavours plus a nod to the west coast with a heap of American hops, so expecting something a little bit more hop forward than you would get with a British stout with that one. And on the porter, it goes on to say, before Sierra Nevada was a reality, our nights were spent perfecting home brews and dreaming of starting a brewery. Back then, one of our favourites was a porter made with homemade roast malts in our kitchen. Decades later, we still live the rich, bittersweet and roasted malt flavours of that original brew. So they're both kind of saying the same thing. They're pretty early versions of what Sierra Nevada set out to do, and as a result that will be interesting. I'm expecting the stout in this case to be a bit hoppier and definitely a bit stronger in ABV, but only by a little bit. But yeah, let's get these open and see what they're really about. Although they produce pretty similar results. The porter was a bit lighter on the pour as it was coming out of the can. I actually sat here right now, as soon as I hold them up, there is just a bit more light bleed through on the porter as we'd probably expect. Both very lively beers. These are identical glasses. I'm not sure why they're quite that heavy on the foam, but anyway, they look pretty decent nonetheless. The visual on the foam, barely a difference. I don't know if you can tell how much difference there is in light between the two, but I will get my phone on the case with a little torch and see if I can show you. This is how much light you can get bleed through with the stouts, and let's be honest, it's really not a lot. The porter though, does start to light up just a little bit, but actually really not that much at all. So yeah, just a lot more, I guess, than the stout was. But let's be honest, that is probably to be expected. But otherwise, they look pretty damn similar. I'm actually going to go in for the porter first because it is the lower ABV. Let's give this a little sniff test to see what the differences are. So it's got a creamy, nice, almost kind of milk bottle sweet aroma about it. It feels a bit lactosey, even though I'm pretty sure it's probably not a lactose beer, and just absolutely heaps of nice soft sweetness from the grain. It's got a little bit of a raisiny fruit note, dried fruit, but still juicy sweet.
So juicy sweet.
It's not too rich, not too tannin heavy. It's, yeah, a bit plummy perhaps, but anyway, it smells very nice indeed. On the flip side, the stout. Still sweet, but it's much bigger, much roastier, loads more aroma in this. It's lost that somewhat lactosey milk sweetness that I was talking about on the porter. It's gained a load of richer fruit, nut, think figgy pudding, Christmas pudding vibes. Like, they aren't wholly dissimilar, but the porter has got this nice, deep, earthy tone with a load of brightness kind of to balance it out a bit. You know, it feels a bit fresher, a touch of a grassy hop note actually starting to come through now, and it just feels more balanced. The stout though, big, rich, deep. You're not getting a huge amount of those American hops that they talked about on the can, if I'm totally honest, but might only be 0.2% stronger, but it definitely smells a fair bit stronger, I must say. They both smell fantastic, but yes, the porter feels infinitely more sessionable. The stout feels a bit more like a nice winter warmer, which, well, is unfortunate because it's currently August now. We're in August, and it's been red hot here. But as you might have guessed, the fact that I've broken the dark beers out, it has finally cooled off just a touch, at least for today. So let's give the porter a go, shall we? Cheers. Got quite a light body, slightly creamy, sweet. It's got this kind of juicy red fruit thing on the flavour as well. Think like a strawberry and raspberry syrup almost. It's definitely not the deepest, darkest fruits, but they're definitely, you know, not the most refreshing either. It's, I'll be entirely honest, absolutely delicious. People often ask me what is my favourite beer, what my favourite types of beer. I do say dark beer in general, and that is absolutely true, but I do have a real soft spot for a really well put together porter. It doesn't have to be low ABV as this one proves, but it just has that balance, has that sessionability, and yeah, I fear for the stout safety in this comparison, because that for me is going to be pretty hard to beat. But we will find out if it can, so let's give the stout a go. Cheers. Bigger, richer, more licorice, few coffee tones coming in. It's all in all out just a more amped up version. The booze comes through loads more again. I don't know what it is about those darker, richer, slightly more bitter profiles that stouts give, but the booze is so much more evident. They are nearly the same ABV, remember. And I was saying so much about how the porter felt sessionable. The stout, yeah, not so much. What it does do though is give you an absolute blanket of flavourings to try and work your way through. As I already said, it's those deep, dark, rich fruits, coffee, licorice, and so on. But you sit here, and it's still sitting on my tongue now, maybe a minute after the last sip, and I'm just getting, well, just these subtle reminders, really, of other things. It's got this kind of dark, oaky, tannin quality. Not sure if it's reminding me of a good red wine, or a really heavily oaked whiskey, or something else completely, but those more, don't want to use the word nuance, but those distinct tones that you get in barrel aged things, it has something reminiscent of that. I don't for a minute think that this has been in a barrel or has had any wood chucked in with it, but just the depth, the roast, the almost woodiness of the grains as a result of that roasting process just leave you with something that is definitely another level. The stout's really good as well, actually. I'm not going to lie, that is absolutely sensational. Today it is still quite warm, so I'm definitely in favour of the porter, but I'll be honest, if you're looking for a stout and a porter to compare, you could do far worse than these two I've got right here. But what really is the difference between a stout and a porter? That is what we're trying to answer. And now, having gone back to the porter, in comparison to the stout, I feel like it's taking on even more sweetness, even more softness, giving me a bit of like proper vanilla ice cream vibes almost. Maybe even think kind of a, you know, a cola float or something like that. it is, honestly, I'm going to have a great time after I finish filming this, just sipping on these because they are both absolutely phenomenal. But a porter is an easier drink. It will appeal to more people. It is less abrasive in its extremes. And that in general is true across the board. Whether it is a higher ABV one or not, that is still just always going to be the slightly more, well, I've said it a million times, balanced. Balanced is the word. I can absolutely understand why when Guinness first came out many decades ago, they labelled it as a porter because, well, how many people do you know that like Guinness but don't really like what we'd call proper stouts, the big rich ones? There's quite a few of them, and that's because it's not really a stout, I don't think. It's more along the lines of a porter. And if you hold a light up to the back of a pint of Guinness, you do get quite a lot of light bleeding through. So maybe not a surprise. It has got that thing. And the stout really is your thinking man's beverage. As I say, cold winter's night in front of a fire in a pub, all I want is the biggest, roastiest, I'm not going to say the most over the top. I'm actually not a massive fan of imperial stouts. They're all the rage these days, of course, but to be honest, they're overcooking it. I want to try a few different things, and that, well, you can't really do that because your palate gets absolutely blasted. This though, this middle of the road, high five, 6% area stout is just, well, for me, what winter dreams are made of. And to be honest, with the heat we've had, I'm really looking forward to winter already. But alright then, I'm going to try and lay out what I think are the actual defining features of a stout and a porter and how they differ to each other so that you can make that informed decision. Right at the top, the stout is bigger, heavier, the porter is lighter and softer. It's just an easier thing to consume more of. Dominant flavour wise, they are a little bit different again. Stout definitely in with that big, roasty and bitter note. That is the dominant flavour. It can have sweetness, it can do the fruity thing, it can do heaps of things if we're being totally honest, trying different ones, but roasty and bitter is the underlying dominance to pretty much any proper stout out there. On the flip side, the porter, it's sweet and fruity. It is always going to be just a little bit sweet and a little bit fruity. There are roasty tones, but they aren't dominant and they aren't ever present. So yeah, that is the difference on that part. If I was forced to, yes, I would say in general stouts are a higher ABV than a porter. That is just generally it, but there's a lot of crossover these days, so take that with a bit of a pinch of salt. It does not mean that's always the case. I've seen many breweries produce both and put a small difference between them, normally a higher on the stout. I have seen some where they've been exactly the same, so it didn't really make a great deal of sense, other than the fact that the flavour profile was a bit different. But that's really it. Do you want more intense or do you want more just balanced casual sipping? That's it. The porter really is just the sessionable version of a stout. They are incredibly similar in many ways, and ultimately that is how it was created and where it got its name from. Dark beer or stout was the trendy beer at the time, sometime in the 17 and 1800s in the UK, and porters, the occupation of a porter, the person that stands outside the front of a hotel and what have you in London, decided that they wanted to drink it too, but they were working, and this was in a period of time apparently when drinking beer whilst at work was acceptable. We will, pray for those days to return at some point. I'm joking, it's probably not a good idea. But anyway, they would ask for a lower ABV version, a more sessionable version that they could just sip and it'd keep them warm on those cold nights, but wouldn't make them unable to do their job. So the porter beer was born, and as a result, it makes perfect sense that it is a more sessionable beer. And I, for one, I'm going to go away and absolutely session on it because this one, both of them in fact, but this porter in particular from Sierra Nevada is absolutely stunning. So if you get a chance, get some in, even though it's probably a bit warm for it at the minute, but you won't regret it in a couple of months' time, I absolutely assure you. And to be honest, that is really all I've got to say about it. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you haven't already, subscribe if you'll be so kind, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.